Continuing our conversation, today we'll finally try to understand how the Ottoman Empire was created and what kind of a society it was. We have already mentioned that in 1453, Constantinople was conquered. Our main goal is to find out who today's Ottoman Turks are. Even scientists and historians of the Western and Eastern Muslim countries have different conceptual approaches. In the West, there's a well-accepted term, the fall of the Byzantine Empire, while in the East, the conquest of the Byzantine Empire term is used. And this is a serious problem which causes hot arguments during conferences. These are fundamentally different approaches. However, the fact is that in 1453, finally, the rule of Muslim political and military elite was established in the empire. The main problem of Byzantine was the new direction in Christianity. Catholicism, which in 1054 caused the separation of the churches into Catholicism and Chalcedonianism. The latter was later called Orthodox. The historical phase from the 11th century to 1453, the fall of Byzantine, represents these contradictions. This is why it's said to have been conquered, not collapsed. Since no one can come up with tangible facts that Byzantine was captured. This is the true problem. So, on account of the contradictions between these two different directions in Christianity, Islam triumphed. It's not a novelty. We saw such phenomenon happen in the 6th, 7th century, when Miaphysite and Diophysite directions caused the birth of a new religion, Islam. As a result, the whole eastern part of the empire was Islamified. The second phase of the Islamization lasted from the 11th century until the 14th century. Here, many important facts can be brought up. I'll touch upon some facts that I had covered in my previous lectures so that we thoroughly comprehend everything. What problems did Byzantine have during the religious split? Venice, the most powerful region in the Byzantine Empire, was the biggest problem. Venice had been the most powerful part of the empire and had big advantages in trade. The emperor gave them a lot as they had most powerful vessels, navy, and everything. They thus created big opportunities for the connection between Constantinople and Venice to work. However, after this split, Venice sided with the first Rome. The fundamental part of Byzantine was gone. Byzantine could not function without Venice. That existing huge trade class had to be kept. The capital could not live without them. But there were already big problems. Why? Because merchants from Venice, Genoa, started appearing in Constantinople. Everyone appeared there. And over decades, the presence and dominance of Catholics in the capital city fueled a public resentment. What is this? You have given the capital away to the Catholics. One gets petrified looking into the hatred described over there. That caused a large-scale massacre in 1182. When even the emperor exhorted the people, and together they staged a terrifying massacre against the Catholics. It is said that it was a more powerful massacre than those of further European massacres. That was not forgotten and deepened the conflict further. We have already told about the Crusaders who, since 1096, had been moving to the east. There's even a view, which is now being questioned, that the emperor himself invited the Crusaders as there were some difficulties in the east. Islam was expanding its borders, but the reality was very cruel. In fact, in 1204, the descendants of the massacred Catholics, also known as Latins because they were already called Latins in the Byzantine, conquered Constantinople and established a Latin empire. The Crusaders plundered the city using every justification, and there are descriptions on that as well. It is a known fact that the territory of the Byzantine Empire collapsed and was divided into various parts. Trabzon, near the Black Sea, is seen here, and the territory of Greece. However, the most interesting fact is that the capital was moved to Nicaea in 1204. Already in 1243, the Mongols reached near Nicaea but did not invade, as it was under the flag of Christianity. I have already told about all this. It is a well-known story. There were no essential changes in this territory until 1261. However, Latins and Byzantines constantly fought against each other. They even called themselves Romans. Both sides claimed to be Rome. That is very interesting. Last time I talked about a small Turkic authority, which was also called Rome. It is of utmost importance to understand how it was in their mentality. Each side was fighting to become Rome, no matter who they actually were. The Mongols did not interfere and even helped. In 1261, Nicaea captured Constantinople again and restored the empire in the central part. However, they were already scared. They were already afraid of being punished by the European Catholics, as Catholicism was growing at the time. During the 9th, 10th, and 11th centuries, many states were formed in the western parts of the Byzantine Empire. Bulgaria was established as an Orthodox Christian country. Then Serbia, again Orthodox. But Hungary adopted Catholicism. Catholicism was already adopted near the border. Let's get back to the main subject, the 11th century, as the general logic is clear. At the time, the main problems of Byzantine had been passed on to European territory. As new factors showed up, there was a need to protect the religion and lands from newly formed countries and their allies. It was, however, not that simple. When a new country was born, others would come and establish ties with it. For instance, Venice did it with Serbia. Now we'll see what happened and how it ended up. We have already depicted the relations between Byzantine and Baghdad Caliphate in Asia Minor in the 11th century. There are many facts, and I've already brought up a lot of them, evincing that the Christians were the very problem for the empire. So the flag of Islam was raised. Islamization of small rulers began. The power was given to Muslims. What happened in the western part? I have already spoken about the well-known period. In 1341, the famous John VI seized the power of Byzantine from the legitimate Emperor John V, which led to a civil war. This is a very essential phase. And I already covered the stories on how Turkic troops were used to solve inner problems in the 11th century. You remember Michael Dukas's story when he established ties with the caliphate, had an agreement. In 1077, first inner political conflicts started to emerge, and in 77, they invited and used Turkic troops in their domestic politics. Then, those troops were deployed in Nicaea. The same policies were applied in the West as the Turkic nomadic tribes were living near the northern shores of the Black Sea, the Pechenegs, Polovtsi, etc. In the 11th century, too, one of the emperors of the time invited troops to destroy the states that were being formed in the western parts. In the 11th century, the emperor Constantine Monomachos invited someone named Kegen or Keget. In different languages, the name spelling is different, and gave him the military title of Roman commander, one of the highest ranks, provided that he adopted Christianity. It is said that he adopted it. He used them, even allowed him, the Kegan, to bring his troops into the area. The same things happened in the West and the East at the same time. Since the 11th century, the conflicts in the West were much more complicated than in the East. As the latter managed to make an agreement in 1071, they acted accordingly and prolonged it. In the West, the situation was difficult on account of newly born states. That led to the very long opposition between the Johns. In fact, from 1341 until 1357, there were civil wars in Byzantine. Both sides were using the nomadic troops against each other. They were mainly brought from the shores of the Black Sea. The famous Orhan, and I've already talked about him, who was brought by John VI, settled down here. We are entering an essential phase when from 41 until the end of the century, 1402, all processes were taking place in the western part of Byzantine. It is true to claim that those troops were generally based on Islam. That Turkic factor already did not exist in the 14th century, as it is described that since the 14th century, the troops were gathered from local Christians. The Muslim generals who were serving the emperor, the same Orhan, gathered soldiers from the Christians, provided that they adopted Islam. When people talk that Janizaries appeared, it was in the 14th century. There are different approaches on who or what it was, but sometimes this was ascribed to the same Orhan. His first troops consisted of Islamified Greek soldiers. See, things changed. The flag of Islam was raised. The state policy was based on it, and there was no need to recruit troops from elsewhere. It's the very difference between the 11th century and the 14th century. An interesting thing happened here. The inner civil war turns into a major war. In 1352, John VI was an old man. His son, whose name was Matthew, had hopes for becoming the next emperor. It was in this eastern part called Eastern Thrace, where John VI's son showed up. But he could not approach Constantinople as John VI was still in power. John V gathered troops with the help of Serbia and Venice. Serbs, and some say again Turkic troops, again Islamic troops. See, both sides are doing the same. The emperor again sends Islamic troops, and they attack the eastern Thrace. They say he sent 10,000. There were 4,000 Serbs. In the end, that Islamic troops smashed. First invasion. First case in 1352. Fighting each other, they ceded the territory to Islam. And it started continuously. See how interesting it is. If we look at the map, everything becomes clear. There are some taken areas in the eastern part, but the facts indicate that everything started in the western part. Muslim elite was formed in the west. They continued massacring everyone, mainly Bulgaria and Serbia. Why did they get massacred? Because they were of the same religion. He brought Islam to prevent Venice's precedent to repeat again. That is the very issue. They are afraid of them, siding with others, and Hungary already did that. This is the very essence of the problem. By 66, the main part of this territory was captured and called Rumelia, already Islamified. They even got a capital city. They renamed Adrianopolis to Edirne and made it Rumelia's capital. It is surprising indeed. How come the capital city stayed here when the whole European part was captured? And here it is. It was done by the emperor. By the year 96, Bulgaria and Serbia were captured, making them vassals. But what about those Muslim troops? Everyone writes that they continued to plunder, lived with it. They had no administration. They had just occupied the territory. This made the emperor become dependent on them and meet their needs. In 1357, finally, the power remained to John V. He eventually got the power, others were killed, escaped, and they eventually disappeared. There's a very interesting fact in historiography when the consecutive emir or sultan, and they were also called sultans, by essence they were emirs, and emirs were also called the army generals. I will talk about this on a separate occasion. Someone named Sultan Bayazid, or Emir Bayazid, introduced his own terms when he established ties with the emperor. There must be a Muslim district, court, mosques in the capital. See what he already imposed. He, this Bayazid, was holding the son of the very emperor as a captive so that his demands were met. Look how the relationships were built. In mainstream historiography, this was interpreted differently. There are historians who completely comprehend every aspect of this, but it did not become a mainstream current. Since the second part of the 19th century, the mainstream current has become the one I already told you about. Seljuks, Ottomans, came from the east and conquered the country, etc. But you see, there's a different process. I'll bring up another fact so that you comprehend the seriousness of all this. After 1396, Bulgaria was already captured. The troops moved to the east from the west. The so-called sultans came not from the east. The Muslim troops of Sultan moved to the east to conquer Anatolia. They did not come from the east. On the contrary, they came from the west. Finishing up their tasks, there they came to Anatolia, to the east, Asia Minor. Why? To invade. They are invading now. It is said that it was conquered in the 11th century. They came from there, from the west, to conquer. And they reached famous Sebastia, up to Angora. However, a new power appears from here. Tamerlane. It is such an interesting thing. There are facts that they invited. He was in the territory of Armenia at that time. In 1401 already, Sultan Bayezid headed towards the east, to Anatolia, to conquer. High-ranking clergymen from Constantinople, Venice, and the Emperor of Trebizond, the Emperor of the capital, Constantinople, does not appear in this act, by the way, appeared to Tamerlane to smash Bayezid. It is natural that the clergymen see how the Emperor of Constantinople raises Islamic flag, the Islamic troops. Venice realizes what is getting established against them. That is, against them, against Catholicism, so that the country does not become Catholic. It turns out that they came and offer this, isn't it? And again, this thesis of mine, that if someone appears, moves, some nomads or else, you should see who invited them. They invite them who met in Angora. They try to reconcile. There was an exchange of letters between Bayezid and Tamerlane. However, to no avail. They fought each other. He, Tamerlane, came and destroyed Bayezid's army and either killed or took him as a captive. And that became the end of those troops. But what happens next? The most interesting thing, a fight between the killed Bayezid's two sons, and it is written this way, maybe it is not true, began to fight each other for power, which lasted 11 years. In 1413, the Emperor of Byzantine, Manvel II, helped someone named Mehmed I, which was said to be the son of Bayezid. Maybe it is not true. Maybe this was all devised. Emmanuel helps Mehmed to take power. Many write that a surprising thing took place. That army was collapsed. It was entirely destroyed. You don't know, they exist or not. This is not known. It was the proper time to get rid of them. Liberate the country, right? They say the Turks invaded and established Rumelia, but the facts say of something different. The emperor supported someone named Mehmed, who re-established his rule under the flag of Islam. I cannot find any facts to see what was the picture in Asia Minor. All small rulers in Asia Minor were annihilated by Mongols, the 12th century rulers we talked about. It was a desert there, in terms of power after the Mongols. Then Tamerlane came and subjugated them. It is not in vain that Bayezid came to retake Asia Minor. Tamerlane was invited. He came and smashed Bayezid. That is why it's hard to imagine the situation in the east at the time. After the conquest of the capital in 1453, some tangible facts came to light which concern the eastern part. We'll talk about this later as it shows how the society and the elite was synthesized when political and military activities towards the eastern part started. I will talk about this later. It is pretty interesting.